The early winter air in Maple Creek, Illinois, had a sharp bite to it, the kind that made the warmth of home feel like a sanctuary. Inside their modern two-story house, Claire and Ben Miller were cocooned in that very sanctuary. Light spilled from large windows onto a perfectly manicured lawn, revealing a life of clean lines, comfortable furniture, and quiet success. They were on the couch, a movie playing softly on the screen, the picture of a perfect Friday night. Across the lawn, separated by a stretch of frosty grass, stood Eleanor's house. It was an older, traditional home that seemed to hold its breath in the cold. Most of its windows were dark, projecting a silence that felt heavy and timeless, a stark contrast to the vibrant glow of its neighbors. It was a street of peaceful isolation, where lives ran parallel but rarely intersected, until the sharp, insistent ring of a doorbell cut through the quiet. Ben sighed, untangling himself from the blanket, his patience already fraying. It was the third time that week. He opened the door to find Eleanor Peterson, a small, frail figure wrapped in a thick coat, her posture ramrod straight despite the cold. Her gaze, though weary and clouded with age, held a familiar glint of accusation. Before she could even speak, Ben could feel the familiar tension rising in his chest. "Your garden light," she began, her voice thin but firm. "It's shining directly into my bedroom window again. It's impossible to get any sleep with that glare." Ben's jaw tightened. He had made a point to turn it off after her last visit. He was about to point this out, his tone sharper than he intended, but a soft touch on his arm stopped him before the words could escape. A silent plea for restraint that he couldn't ignore. Claire moved past him, her presence immediately calming the charged air on the porch. She offered Eleanor a small, disarming smile and gently guided her to the edge of the steps. "Let's have a look, Eleanor," she said, her voice even and kind. She pointed toward the small garden that separated their properties. The space was cloaked in darkness, the landscape light fixture they had installed last spring completely dormant. The only illumination came from a distant streetlight, casting long, skeletal shadows of the bare trees across the lawn. A profound silence fell between them, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Claire watched Eleanor's face, expecting to see relief or perhaps even embarrassment. Instead, the old woman's expression crumbled from rigid complaint into a look of deep, bewildering helplessness, as if the darkness she was shown was more confusing than the light she had imagined. In that quiet, frozen moment, as Eleanor stared into the unlit garden, Claire saw it all. The problem had never been the light. It was a fabrication, a tool, the only one an elderly, forgotten woman had left to pierce the crushing silence of her own life. The darkness that truly bothered Eleanor wasn't shining from their yard. It was emanating from the empty rooms behind her, a profound loneliness that had become her constant companion. Ben stood in the doorway, his own frustration melting away into a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. He saw not a nuisance, but a person drowning in solitude, reaching for any connection, even a negative one. It's a quiet kind of pain that so many people endure right next door, a story that often goes unheard. If you feel these are the stories that matter, subscribing to our channel ensures we can continue to share them. That first step inside Eleanor's house felt like crossing into another time. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint, sweet scent of old paper and dried lavender. Unlike their own home, which was an open space of light and modern minimalism, Eleanor's was a world of shadows and memories. Dark wood furniture stood like silent sentinels, covered in delicate lace doilies. Every surface held a framed photograph, a porcelain figurine, a captured moment from a life fully lived. Ben stood awkwardly by the door, a visitor in a land he didn't understand, while Claire moved with a quiet reverence toward the kitchen. The contrast was jarring. It wasn't just two houses on a street, it was two separate universes that had, until this moment, only orbited each other without ever touching. The simple act of boiling water for tea felt like a profound intrusion, a gentle disruption of the home's long, silent slumber. They sat in the formal living room, a space that felt preserved rather than lived in. Eleanor perched on the edge of a floral armchair, her back ramrod straight, her wrinkled hands clasped tightly around the porcelain cup Claire had given her. The conversation started in hesitant fragments. Claire asked about the photographs, and Eleanor's replies were short, clipped sentences naming children who now lived in Arizona and Oregon, grandchildren she knew mostly from holiday cards. But as she spoke, a subtle shift occurred. Her gaze would soften as she looked at a picture of a young man with a confident smile, his arm wrapped around her. That was Arthur," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We bought this house together. He planted the maple tree in the front yard the day our first son was born. It wasn't a story, not yet, but it was a seed. Over the next hour, a few more seeds were planted. Eleanor spoke of the neighborhood as it once was, a place of summer block parties and children's laughter echoing down the street until dusk. She described the 4th of July parades that used to march right past her front lawn, with Arthur grilling hot dogs for what felt like the entire town. She wasn't complaining or lamenting. She was simply remembering, pulling dusty memories from the shelves of her mind and holding them up to the light for the first time in years. Claire and Ben listened, no longer just neighbors, but witnesses to a history they never knew existed just a few feet from their own front door. They saw the ghost of a vibrant, joyful woman sitting in the frail, lonely figure before them. When Eleanor finally stood to leave, the stiffness had eased from her posture. She offered a simple, heartfelt thank you that held more weight than 1,000 words. As the door clicked shut behind her, a heavy silence descended upon Claire and Ben. It was Ben who broke it, his voice laced with a pragmatic concern that bordered on frustration. "Claire, this is kind of you. But we can't become her caretakers. We have our own lives, our own plans." He wasn't being cruel, merely protective of the peaceful, orderly world they had built. Claire understood his fear, but she couldn't shake the image of Eleanor's face in the darkness. "She's not asking for caretakers, Ben," she replied softly. "She's just asking not to be invisible. We can't just pretend we didn't see that." The first crack in their perfect bubble had appeared. The following days were marked by a quiet, unspoken truce. There were no more late-night knocks on the door, no more complaints about fictional lights. Instead, a new, tentative form of communication began. One morning, Claire found a small jar of homemade strawberry jam on their doorstep, with a neatly written note that simply said, "From my garden." The next day, Claire left a warm loaf of sourdough bread on Eleanor's porch. It was a simple exchange, a bartering of kindness across the frosted lawn that separated their homes. These small gestures became a bridge, built plank by plank over the chasm of loneliness and misunderstanding. Yet, beneath the surface, Ben's apprehension lingered, a quiet hum of anxiety about where this uncharted path was leading them and what it would ultimately ask of them. That anxiety crystallized into stark reality a week later. It was a Tuesday, and Claire noticed that the morning paper was still on Eleanor's porch in the late afternoon. Then she saw the mail carrier stuff another day's worth of letters into the already full mailbox. A cold knot of dread tightened in her chest. She called Eleanor's phone, but it rang and rang, the unanswered chimes echoing in the silent house across the lawn. She called again an hour later, with the same result. By evening, a shared panic had settled over Claire and Ben. The quiet street no longer felt peaceful. It felt ominous. It's terrifying to realize how quickly a person can disappear behind their own front door, a silent struggle that so many face alone. Seeing these stories and understanding them is why we do what we do. and your subscription is what makes it possible for us to continue." Finally, they could wait no longer. With trembling hands, Claire retrieved the spare key Eleanor had given them weeks ago, a gesture that had seemed overly cautious at the time, but now felt like a lifeline. Ben stood behind her as she unlocked the door, the click of the tumbler sounding unnaturally loud in the evening stillness. They stepped inside, calling her name into the cold, silent rooms. They found her in the living room, lying on the floor beside the floral armchair. Her eyes were open, filled with a mixture of fear and relief. She had fallen hours ago, unable to get up or reach the phone. The air in the room was stagnant, the silence profound. In that moment, Eleanor wasn't just an elderly neighbor. She was a stark, heartbreaking portrait of human fragility. While Ben was on the phone with the 911 operator, his voice steady and calm despite the tremor in his hands, Claire knelt on the floor. She took Eleanor's icy hand in her own, stroking it gently and speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "We're here, Eleanor. Help is on the way. You're not alone." She looked around the room, truly seeing it for the first time, not as a collection of old furniture, but as the scene of a lonely battle. The dust on the end table, the stack of unread magazines, the faint chill in the air, all were signs of a life slowly winding down in isolation. The ambulance arrived with flashing lights that momentarily lit up the dark windows, a beacon of crisis on their quiet, unassuming street, forever changing the dynamic between the two homes. The sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room of the hospital was a world away from Maple Creek. For hours, Claire and Ben sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, the only names listed on Eleanor's emergency contact form. The argument they'd had about boundaries and responsibilities felt like a lifetime ago, a trivial debate from a life of blissful ignorance. Now, faced with the tangible reality of Eleanor's vulnerability, there was no more debate. They were her people. Whether they had chosen this role or not, it was theirs. A doctor finally emerged to tell them she was stable, dehydrated and bruised, but miraculously, no broken bones. The wave of relief that washed over them was so profound, it left them breathless, cementing a bond of shared worry and care that felt as strong as any family tie. Eleanor's return from the hospital marked a new chapter. The fall had taken a physical and emotional toll, leaving her more frail and visibly shaken. The proud, upright posture was now slightly stooped, and her confidence was replaced by a hesitant dependence. This was the turning point for Claire, the moment where duty of care transformed into a deep, abiding affection. She started visiting every day, at first just to check in, but soon the visits grew longer. She would bring groceries, help tidy the kitchen, or simply sit and listen as Eleanor, prompted by old photographs, would weave tales of her life with Arthur. Slowly, Claire's presence began to chase the shadows from the corners of the old house, filling the silence with conversation and laughter. Their newfound routine was disrupted by the unexpected arrival of a sleek rental car pulling into Eleanor's driveway. A man in a sharp business suit emerged, his face a mask of weary impatience. This was Mark, the nephew from Arizona, summoned by a hospital social worker. His eyes, scanning Claire and Ben as they helped Eleanor with her garden, were filled with suspicion. "So you're the neighbors," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. He cornered them on the porch later that day, his questions sharp and accusatory. "What's your angle here? My aunt is an old woman. I want to know what you're getting out of this." His cynicism was a slap in the face, an ugly insinuation that poisoned their simple acts of kindness. Claire felt a flush of anger, but held it back, choosing dignity over defense. She met his gaze evenly and explained, in a calm and steady voice, how the relationship had begun with a complaint about a light. She told him about the fall, the hospital, the shared cups of tea, and the stories about Arthur. Ben stood beside her, his quiet solidarity a powerful statement. Before Mark could respond with another cynical barb, Eleanor's voice, stronger than they had heard it in weeks, cut through the tension from the doorway. "They are my friends, Mark," she declared, her eyes fixed on her nephew. "When I was alone and in the dark, they were the ones who showed up. They are my family now." It was a declaration that left no room for argument, a truth that shone brighter than any suspicion. Mark's visit had been a turning point, solidifying their bond against his unfounded suspicions. A few weeks later, the chill of winter had fully set in, but inside Claire and Ben's home, a palpable warmth filled the air. They were having dinner together, the three of them, seated around the small kitchen table. The aroma of roasted chicken and rosemary mingled with the soft glow of candlelight, creating an atmosphere of intimate comfort. Eleanor, wrapped in a soft blue sweater, looked more at ease than they had ever seen her. The guarded formality was gone, replaced by a gentle smile that reached her eyes. She laughed at one of Ben's stories, a sound that was light and genuine, like a forgotten melody being played for the first time in years. It was no longer an obligatory visit or an act of charity. It was simply a family sharing a meal. After they had cleared the plates, Eleanor reached into her handbag and carefully pulled out a small, leather-bound wallet. From a worn sleeve, she produced a faded black-and-white photograph, its edges softened with time. She slid it across the table toward Claire. It showed a young, vibrant Eleanor standing next to a handsome man with a kind, confident smile. His arm was wrapped securely around her waist, and they were both looking at the camera with the unshakable optimism of youth. "That was my Arthur," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, thick with a love that had transcended decades. "We were standing right on the front lawn, the day we moved into our house. He promised me then that he would always make sure I had a light to come home to, so I'd never have to face the darkness alone." Claire and Ben listened, their gazes fixed on the old photograph, feeling the weight of the story it held. Eleanor's eyes welled with tears, but she wasn't crying from sadness. It was a look of profound, aching nostalgia. She finally looked up from the image, her gaze meeting Claire's, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "He always left the porch light on for me when I came home late from my nursing shifts," she explained, her voice trembling slightly. "It was our thing, a little beacon just for me. When he passed, the house became so dark." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I wasn't complaining about your light," she confessed, her words hanging in the silent air. "I was missing mine." The confession landed with the force of a physical blow, stripping away every last bit of misunderstanding and leaving only raw, heartbreaking truth. It was never about a nuisance light fixture. It was about the extinguishing of the most important light in her life. Ben stared at the table, his jaw tight with emotion, the memory of his own initial annoyance now a source of deep shame. Claire felt a tear slide down her cheek as she reached across the table, her hand covering Eleanor's frail one. In that single, devastating sentence, she understood the immeasurable depth of a widow's grief and the desperate, clumsy ways the heart tries to ask for help. It's in these moments of vulnerability that we see the truth of another's soul, a gift that reminds us of what truly matters. We're so grateful you subscribe, because it's your support that allows us to witness and share these powerful connections. Without a word, Ben pushed his chair back and walked to the front of the house. He flipped a switch, and through the window, they saw their own porch light spring to life, casting a warm, golden glow across the frosty lawn and onto the front of Eleanor's house. He returned to the table and looked at Eleanor, his eyes conveying an apology and a promise all at once. "From now on, it stays on," he said, his voice soft but firm. "It's for you." Eleanor looked from the light outside to the two faces before her, her expression one of overwhelming gratitude. The tears now fell freely, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of being seen, of finally finding a new light to guide her home in the darkness. That single act of turning on a light became a nightly ritual, a silent promise kept across the lawn. The relationship that followed was not one of obligation, but of genuine, chosen family. The quiet, sterile space of Eleanor's house began to breathe again. Claire helped her plant a new rose garden in the spring, their hands in the dirt together, and the windows were often thrown open to let in the warm breeze and the sound of birdsong. Dinners became a regular occurrence, rotating between their two kitchens, filling the evenings with the comforting aromas of shared meals and easy conversation. Ben found in Eleanor a surprising confidant, a source of quiet wisdom that grounded him. Their once perfect insular world had been cracked open, and what flooded in was not chaos, but a richer, more meaningful kind of life they never knew they were missing. As the seasons turned, the bond between them deepened into something solid and permanent. Eleanor wasn't just a neighbor. She was the keeper of their shared history, a loving presence that enriched their days. She taught Claire how to make her famous strawberry jam and showed Ben the best way to prune the old maple tree Arthur had planted. Seeing her gentle strength and the quiet joy she now found in each day fundamentally shifted something within Claire and Ben. The abstract plans for their own future, once a distant concept, began to feel immediate and real. They realized the life they had built was strong enough and now warm enough to welcome another. Their decision to start a family was no longer a leap into the unknown, but a natural next step, a way to add another light to the beautiful constellation they had formed. 2 years later, the backyard of Claire and Ben's house was a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Balloons bobbed in the gentle summer breeze, and the air was filled with the laughter of friends and family. At the center of it all, seated in a comfortable wicker chair like a queen on her throne, was Eleanor, celebrating her 82nd birthday. She was radiant, her eyes sparkling with a light that came from deep within. In her arms, she cradled a sleeping infant, Claire and Ben's 6-month-old son, Leo, humming a soft tune. She was no longer the forgotten woman in the dark house, but the beloved matriarch, the honorary grandmother who was the heart of their new world. Seeing her there, surrounded by love, was a testament to the families we build by choice. We are so deeply thankful for your subscription, which helps us continue to witness and share these stories of human connection. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden rays across the lawn, the party guests began to depart. Soon, it was just the three of them, and the tiny, sleeping boy. Ben reached over and flipped the switch for their porch light, and a moment later, as if in response, the light on Eleanor's porch flickered on, a feature Ben now helped her maintain. The two beams of light met in the middle of the grass, a bridge of warmth connecting their homes. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the twilight. The darkness that had once felt so vast and threatening was now just a soft blanket for the stars, held at bay by the simple, steady glow of two small lights and the immeasurable love of a family that chose to see them.